Picture this scenario. You're in what you believe is a solid relationship. She tells you she loves you, makes future plans together, and seems genuinely happy. Then one day, completely out of nowhere, she's cold and distant. Within weeks, she's moved on to someone else, acting like your entire relationship meant nothing. You're left standing there, wondering what the hell just happened, replaying every conversation, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. But here's what's really happening behind the scenes that no one wants to talk about. Women don't just randomly decide to leave relationships. They don't wake up one morning and suddenly lose feelings. The truth is far more calculated and systematic than most men realize. Women have already emotionally divorced you months before they physically leave. They've already found your replacement, tested the waters, and secured their next option before they ever utter the words, "We need to talk." What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand female psychology and relationship dynamics. The uncomfortable reality is that women operate on a completely different timeline than men when it comes to ending relationships. While you're thinking everything is fine, she's already 3 steps ahead, planning her exit strategy and lining up her next emotional investment. This isn't about being bitter or cynical. This is about understanding biological and psychological realities that govern female behavior in relationships. When you understand these patterns, you stop taking their actions personally and start recognizing them as predictable responses to specific triggers and circumstances. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand exactly why women betray the men who love them most, why they always seem to leave first, and most importantly, how to recognize the warning signs before you become another casualty in their strategic relationship management. This knowledge will save you years of confusion, heartbreak, and wasted emotional energy. The first thing you need to understand about female relationship psychology is that women are constantly evaluating and re-evaluating their romantic situations. This isn't conscious decision-making. It's hardwired biological programming that operates below their awareness. Every interaction, every conversation, every shared experience gets processed through an unconscious cost-benefit analysis that determines whether the relationship is still serving their interests. Men tend to think in terms of loyalty and commitment once they've made an emotional investment. They believe that love means working through problems together and honoring the bond they've created. But women operate on what researchers call the dual mating strategy. They're simultaneously maintaining their current relationship while continuously scanning for better options. This scanning process never stops, even in seemingly happy relationships. She's not consciously looking to cheat or leave, but her subconscious is constantly gathering data about your value relative to other available men. Your behavior, your success, your emotional state, your leadership qualities are all being measured against an internal standard that determines whether you're still the best option available to her. This is why women can appear completely content in a relationship while simultaneously being open to advances from other men. They're not being deliberately deceptive. They're following biological programming that ensured their ancestors could secure the best possible genetic and resource providers for their offspring. Understanding this dual mating strategy explains why women often seem to have one foot out the door even in committed relationships. They're not planning to leave, but they're not planning to stay if something better comes along. This creates a psychological dynamic where they're emotionally hedging their bets, never fully investing in the current relationship because they need to maintain the flexibility to pivot if circumstances change. The betrayal phase begins long before any actual infidelity occurs. It starts with small acts of disrespect and boundary testing that most men either ignore or rationalize away. She begins questioning your decisions more frequently. She starts comparing you unfavorably to other men, sometimes directly, sometimes through subtle comments about what other couples do differently. These behaviors aren't random relationship friction. They're her subconscious testing your psychological strength and leadership capacity. She's determining whether you're still the strong, capable man she initially committed to, or whether you've become comfortable and predictable. This testing phase is crucial because it determines whether she maintains respect for you or begins the process of emotional withdrawal. Most men fail these tests spectacularly because they don't recognize them as tests. When she challenges your decision about weekend plans, you think she's just expressing her preference. When she mentions how attractive her coworker is, you think she's making casual conversation. When she starts spending more time with her single friends who constantly complain about their relationships, you think she's just being social. But each of these behaviors represents her unconscious evaluation of your value and her gradual preparation for potential departure. She's not consciously planning to leave, but she's creating the emotional distance necessary to make leaving easier when the time comes. The testing escalates when she begins comparing your relationship to others, either real couples she knows or fictional relationships she sees in media. She starts expressing dissatisfaction with things that never bothered her before. She begins withholding affection, both physical and emotional, to see how you respond to the withdrawal of her approval. This is where most men make their fatal mistake. Instead of maintaining their strength and boundaries, they begin pursuing her approval more desperately. They try to win back her affection through increased attention, gifts, romantic gestures, and accommodation to her demands. This response actually accelerates her loss of respect and attraction because it confirms that you're becoming needy and desperate. Women are biologically programmed to test male strength because throughout human evolution, their survival and their children's survival depended on partnering with men who could maintain their composure under pressure. A man who becomes anxious and accommodating when tested signals that he lacks the psychological resilience necessary for leadership and protection. During this testing phase, she's also beginning what psychologists call emotional affair preparation. This doesn't mean she's actively seeking other men, but she's becoming more receptive to male attention and more critical of your shortcomings. She starts noticing other men in ways she didn't before. She becomes more responsive to compliments and attention from co-workers, friends, or acquaintances. This emotional preparation phase can last months or even years. She's not cheating, but she's psychologically preparing herself for the possibility of other options. She's creating emotional distance from you while simultaneously becoming more open to connection with others. This is why when women finally do leave or betray, they often seem to move on immediately. They've been emotionally moving on for months before taking any physical action. The betrayal itself, when it comes, takes many forms. Sometimes it's a full emotional affair with a co-worker or friend. Sometimes it's a series of small betrayals, sharing intimate details about your relationship with others, flirting inappropriately, or maintaining inappropriate relationships with ex-boyfriends or male friends. Sometimes it's the ultimate betrayal of physical infidelity. But here's what makes female betrayal particularly devastating for men. Women don't betray the way men do. When men cheat, it's often impulsive and primarily physical. They might have sex with someone else, but maintain emotional loyalty to their primary relationship. Women betray emotionally first. By the time any physical betrayal occurs, they've already transferred their emotional investment to someone else. This emotional betrayal is more threatening to relationships than physical infidelity because it represents a complete shift in her psychological allegiance. She's not just having physical needs met elsewhere, she's creating an emotional bond that directly competes with and often replaces her connection to you. The cruelest aspect of this process is how she maintains the appearance of normalcy while her emotional investment is flowing elsewhere. She continues the routines of your relationship while her heart and mind are increasingly focused on someone else. This creates a situation where you're emotionally investing in someone who's already checked out, even though she hasn't officially ended the relationship. This emotional departure explains why women often seem cold and detached when they finally do leave. They're not being cruel for the sake of cruelty. They've already processed the end of the relationship emotionally. They've already grieved the loss, made peace with leaving, and mentally moved on to their next chapter. By the time they have the breakup conversation with you, they're already psychologically free. Understanding this timeline is crucial for men because it explains why attempts to save the relationship at this stage are usually futile. You're trying to repair something that she's already finished in her mind. You're fighting for someone who's already emotionally committed elsewhere. Your efforts to win her back often appear desperate and pathetic because she's viewing them from the perspective of someone who's already moved on. This is why women always seem to leave first, even in relationships where they were the ones who betrayed trust. They've given themselves months or years to prepare for departure, while you're still operating under the assumption that you're working toward a future together. They have the advantage of emotional preparation and often a backup plan, while you're caught completely off guard by their decision to end things. The biological reality is that women are designed to be strategic about relationship transitions. Throughout human history, women who could successfully transition from one provider to another had better survival odds than women who remained loyal to declining men. This programming creates modern behaviors that seem heartless, but are actually evolutionary adaptations that served important survival functions. Women don't experience guilt about this process the way men might, because their brain chemistry is designed to facilitate these transitions. Once they've emotionally committed to leaving, their biochemistry actually helps them detach from the previous relationship and bond with new possibilities. This is why they can seem so cold and unaffected by your pain during and after breakups. This biochemical shift also explains why reconciliation is so difficult once a woman has emotionally departed. She's not just making a rational decision to leave. Her brain chemistry has literally changed to support bonding with someone else while reducing attachment to you. Fighting against this biological reality is like fighting against gravity. The most important thing to understand about this entire process is that it's not personal, even though it feels incredibly personal. She's not leaving because you're fundamentally flawed or because she's evil. She's following biological programming that prioritizes her long-term security and reproductive success over loyalty to any individual man. This doesn't excuse betrayal or dishonesty, but understanding the underlying psychology helps you respond more strategically and protect yourself from the devastating emotional impact of female departure patterns. When you understand that her behavior follows predictable biological and psychological patterns, you can start recognizing the signs earlier and making better decisions about how to respond. The recognition phase is where most men completely miss the signs because they're operating from a fundamentally different emotional framework. You're looking for logical consistency and clear communication, but women's departure signals operate through emotional withdrawal and behavioral changes that can seem subtle or even contradictory. Her phone becomes her sanctuary. She's suddenly protective of her device in ways she never was before. Text messages get deleted immediately. She takes calls in private, and she's constantly checking social media with a secretive energy that wasn't there before. This isn't necessarily because she's actively cheating, but because she's creating psychological space between you and her inner world. The conversations change in quality and depth. She stops sharing her daily experiences, her thoughts about the future, her concerns and excitement. Instead, interactions become transactional. She discusses logistics, schedules, and practical matters, but avoids the intimate emotional sharing that once characterized your connection. She's protecting her emotional energy for someone else, even if that someone else hasn't fully materialized yet. Physical intimacy doesn't just decrease, it becomes mechanical and obligatory when it happens at all. She goes through the motions without the emotional presence that creates genuine connection. This isn't about sex frequency, it's about the quality of connection during intimate moments. She's physically present, but emotionally absent, and you can feel the difference even if you can't articulate what's changed. Her social patterns shift dramatically. She starts spending more time with friends who validate her dissatisfaction with your relationship. These aren't necessarily bad people, but they become echo chambers that reinforce her growing conviction that she deserves better. Single friends who encourage her to explore her options. Divorced friends who share their liberation stories. or coupled friends who constantly complain about their own relationships. She begins creating independent social circles that don't include you. Work events, gym classes, hobby groups where you're not invited or welcome. This isn't about healthy independence. It's about building a life structure that can exist without you. She's creating the social framework necessary to support her transition away from your shared life. The future planning stops entirely. She avoids conversations about upcoming vacations, long-term goals, or major purchases. When pressed about future plans, she becomes vague or changes the subject. This happens because she's no longer emotionally investing in a shared future, even though she hasn't consciously decided to leave yet. Her criticism becomes more frequent and more personal. She attacks your character rather than addressing specific behaviors. Instead of saying she wishes you'd help more with housework, she tells you you're lazy and inconsiderate. Instead of asking you to plan more dates, she complains that you've become boring and predictable. This escalation in personal attacks indicates that she's building a psychological case against you to justify her eventual departure. The replacement process often begins before the current relationship officially ends. This isn't always a specific person, but rather an emotional opening to new possibilities. She becomes more responsive to attention from other men, more critical of your shortcomings, and more interested in what else might be available to her. Sometimes the replacement is a co-worker who listens to her complaints about you and offers sympathy and understanding. Sometimes it's an old friend who re-enters her life through social media and reminds her of who she used to be before your relationship. Sometimes it's someone she meets through her new independent activities, who represents the excitement and novelty that your relationship no longer provides. The crucial point is that she rarely leaves one relationship without having some form of emotional safety net in place. This might not be a full replacement relationship, but it's some form of validation or possibility that makes leaving feel less risky. Women are risk-averse when it comes to relationship transitions, so they typically secure some form of emotional support before ending their current situation. This explains why they often seem to recover from breakups so quickly while you're devastated and confused. They've been emotionally preparing for months. They've often already formed new emotional connections, and they've mentally rehearsed life without you. By the time they leave, they're psychologically ready to move forward while you're just beginning to process what happened. The timeline manipulation is perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of this entire process. She controls the narrative about when problems started, when she began feeling unhappy, and what efforts were made to address issues. In her version of events, she's been trying to communicate problems for months while you ignored her needs. She's been asking for change while you remained oblivious to her unhappiness. This rewriting of history serves several psychological functions. It justifies her departure by making you the villain who refused to listen or change. It absolves her of guilt by positioning her as the victim who had no choice but to leave. And it validates her new relationship by proving that she exhausted all options before moving on. The reality is often completely different. The problems she claims existed for months were never clearly communicated. The changes she says she requested were never explicitly stated. The signs she insists were obvious were subtle behavioral shifts that could have been interpreted many different ways. But by the time she's ready to leave, she's convinced herself, and often others, that she gave you every opportunity to save the relationship. This historical revision is so common that it's almost universal among women who leave relationships. They need to believe they're moral, reasonable people who only left after exhausting all alternatives. Creating a narrative where you failed to respond to clear warnings allows them to maintain their self-image as good people while pursuing their own interests. The emotional compartmentalization that women demonstrate during this process is remarkable from a psychological perspective. They can maintain affection and even love for you while simultaneously planning their departure and emotionally investing in someone else. This isn't conscious deception. It's a psychological defense mechanism that allows them to manage conflicting emotions and loyalties. They genuinely believe they still care about you while they're betraying you because they've compartmentalized these different aspects of their emotional experience. The part of them that loves you is separate from the part that's planning to leave. The part that feels guilty about their emotional affair is separate from the part that feels excited about new possibilities. This compartmentalization allows them to maintain the relationship routine while their emotional investment flows elsewhere. They can still say they love you, still go through the motions of partnership, still make short-term plans together because they're not consciously lying. They've psychologically separated their declining feelings for you from their growing feelings for someone else. Understanding this compartmentalization explains why confronting them about your suspicions often fails to produce honest admissions. They're not consciously deceiving you because they've separated their betrayal behaviors from their relationship identity. In their mind, they're still being a good partner, even while they're emotionally preparing to leave. The guilt management system that women employ during this process is sophisticated and largely unconscious. They need to maintain their self-image as good people, while behaving in ways that contradict that image. This cognitive dissonance gets resolved through blame shifting, historical revision, and moral justification. They convince themselves that you drove them away through your failures and shortcomings. They reframe their emotional affairs as friendships that you're too jealous and controlling to understand. They justify their departure as necessary for their happiness and personal growth. Every betrayal becomes your fault for not being the man they needed you to be. This guilt management system becomes so effective that they often end up believing their own justifications completely. By the time they leave, they're not just telling you that it's your fault. They genuinely believe it. They've constructed an entire psychological framework where their betrayal becomes your failure, their departure becomes your inadequacy, and their new relationship becomes your inability to meet their needs. The timeline of female departure follows a predictable pattern that most men never recognize until it's too late. Phase 1 is the subtle withdrawal that can last anywhere from 3 to 18 months. During this phase, she's pulling back emotionally while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. She's testing your responses to decreased affection, reduced communication, and increased criticism. Phase 2 is the active replacement phase, where she's either developing emotional connections with other men or creating the social and psychological infrastructure necessary to leave. This phase can overlap with phase 1 and typically lasts several months. She's not necessarily cheating, but she's creating options and preparing herself psychologically for life without you. Phase 3 is the final departure phase, where she's made the decision to leave and is simply managing the logistics and timing. During this phase, she's often already emotionally committed to someone else, or at least to the idea of being single. Your relationship is effectively over in her mind, even though she hasn't told you yet. The most insidious aspect of this timeline is that you're operating with incomplete information throughout the entire process. She knows she's pulling away. She knows she's developing feelings for someone else. She knows she's planning to leave. But you're making decisions based on her public behavior rather than her private emotional reality. This information asymmetry puts you at a massive disadvantage because you're trying to solve problems you don't know exist while she's managing a complex emotional transition that she's not sharing with you. You might notice that something feels different, but without understanding the full scope of her mental and emotional departure, you can't respond appropriately. The biological programming behind this behavior serves important evolutionary functions that explain why it's so consistent across cultures and time periods. Throughout human history, women who could successfully transition from declining providers to better providers had superior survival outcomes. This created selective pressure for psychological mechanisms that facilitate relationship transitions while minimizing personal risk. The ability to emotionally detach while maintaining the appearance of commitment allowed ancestral women to explore better options without losing their current security until a superior alternative was confirmed. The capacity to rewrite relationship history helped them justify major life changes to their social groups, maintaining community support during vulnerable transition periods. Modern women aren't consciously following evolutionary strategies, but they're expressing psychological patterns that were adaptive for their female ancestors. The drive to constantly evaluate and re-evaluate relationship value, the tendency to emotionally withdraw before physically departing, and the two quickly bond with new partners while detaching from previous ones all served important survival functions. Understanding this biological foundation helps explain why these behaviors are so consistent and why they often seem heartless to men who operate from different psychological frameworks. She's not trying to be cruel. She's following deeply ingrained programming that prioritizes her long-term security and reproductive success over loyalty to any individual relationship. The modern dating environment amplifies these biological tendencies in ways that make female betrayal and departure more likely than ever before. Social media provides constant access to potential alternatives and constant reminders of what other relationships look like. Dating apps create the illusion of unlimited options even for women in committed relationships. The cultural messaging around female empowerment encourages women to prioritize their personal happiness over relationship loyalty. They're told that staying in any relationship that doesn't fulfill them completely is settling, that they deserve to have all their needs met, and that leaving is always better than compromising. Professional and social independence means that women don't need relationships for survival the way their ancestors did. This removes many of the practical constraints that once encouraged working through relationship difficulties rather than seeking new partners. When leaving doesn't threaten your economic security, the threshold for relationship dissatisfaction that triggers departure becomes much lower. The combination of biological programming designed for strategic relationship management and modern environmental factors that remove barriers to departure creates conditions where female betrayal and abandonment become increasingly common and predictable. The psychological impact on men who experience this process is severe and long-lasting because it violates their fundamental assumptions about love, loyalty, and partnership. Men typically believe that commitment means working through problems together, that love involves loyalty during difficult periods, and that relationships should be based on honest communication about issues and concerns. When women follow their biological programming for strategic departure, it shatters these assumptions and creates profound psychological trauma that can last for years. The man experiences not just the loss of the relationship, but the destruction of his worldview about how relationships function and what commitment means. The discovery that she was emotionally involved with someone else while claiming to love you, that she was planning to leave while making future plans with you, that she was sharing intimate details about your relationship with others while maintaining the appearance of loyalty. These revelations create a form of psychological injury that's difficult to heal. The betrayal trauma is compounded by the gaslighting that often accompanies female departure. When you confront her about the signs you've noticed, she tells you you're being paranoid, controlling, or insecure. When you question her new friendships or change behavior, she accuses you of not trusting her or being emotionally abusive. This gaslighting serves to maintain her moral self-image while keeping you confused about reality. If she can convince you that your perceptions are wrong, she doesn't have to acknowledge her own betrayal behaviors. If she can make you feel guilty for questioning her, she can continue her emotional affairs while maintaining the appearance of being faithful. The result is that you begin to doubt your own perceptions and instincts. You start to believe that maybe you are being too suspicious. Maybe you are being controlling. Maybe the changes you're noticing aren't as significant as they seem. This self-doubt prevents you from taking protective action and allows the betrayal process to continue without interference. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, you've often been psychologically conditioned to blame yourself for the relationship's failure. You've been convinced that your suspicions were the problem, that your need for honesty and loyalty was unreasonable, and that her departure is the natural consequence of your inadequacies. The recovery process from this type of betrayal is complicated by the fact that most people don't understand the systematic nature of female departure. Friends and family often tell you to focus on what you could have done differently, to learn from your mistakes, to work on yourself so you can be better in future relationships. This well-meaning advice actually perpetuates the psychological damage because it reinforces the narrative that her betrayal was your fault. It suggests that if you had been a better man, a more attentive partner, a stronger leader, she wouldn't have left. This keeps you focused on self-blame rather than understanding the biological and psychological realities that drove her behavior. The truth is that once a woman begins the emotional departure process, there's very little you can do to stop it. The decision to leave happens in her subconscious long before she becomes consciously aware of it. By the time you notice the signs, she's already psychologically committed to departure, even if she hasn't admitted it to herself yet. Trying to win her back through increased attention, romantic gestures, or behavioral changes typically backfires because it confirms her subconscious assessment that you're becoming needy and desperate. The behaviors that might save other types of relationships actually accelerate the departure process once a woman has begun emotional withdrawal. The men who recover most successfully from this experience are those who learn to recognize it as a predictable biological and psychological process rather than a personal failure. They understand that her betrayal and departure followed patterns that have nothing to do with their worth as men or partners. This understanding allows them to rebuild their self-respect and develop strategies for recognizing these patterns earlier in future relationships. They become more selective about partners, more aware of warning signs, and more protective of their emotional and financial investments. Most importantly, they learn to maintain their psychological sovereignty throughout relationships rather than becoming emotionally dependent on female approval and affection. They understand that genuine attraction and respect must be maintained through strength and leadership rather than accommodation and people-pleasing. The men who don't learn these lessons often repeat the same patterns in subsequent relationships, attracting women who are similarly inclined towards strategic departure and betrayal. They continue to believe that love conquers all, that honest communication solves every problem, and that loyalty should be reciprocal in committed relationships. These beliefs, while admirable, don't align with biological and psychological realities that govern female behavior in relationships. Men who cling to these idealistic notions without understanding the underlying dynamics of female psychology set themselves up for repeated betrayal and abandonment. The solution isn't to become bitter or cynical about relationships, but to develop a more realistic understanding of how they actually function versus how we wish they would function. When you understand female psychology and biology, you can make better decisions about partners, recognize problems earlier, and protect yourself from the most damaging forms of betrayal and departure. This knowledge doesn't guarantee relationship success, but it dramatically improves your odds of avoiding the most devastating relationship failures. More importantly, it allows you to maintain your dignity and self-respect throughout the process, rather than becoming psychologically destroyed by experiences that follow predictable patterns. Understanding why women betray and leave first isn't about developing hatred or resentment toward women. It's about accepting biological and psychological realities that govern human behavior and making strategic decisions based on accurate information rather than wishful thinking about how relationships should work. The strategic nature of female departure becomes even more evident when you examine how they manage the transition period. This isn't a chaotic emotional breakdown where they suddenly realize they're unhappy. It's a calculated process where they methodically prepare for life without you while maintaining the illusion of commitment until their exit strategy is complete. During this transition management phase, she becomes a master of compartmentalization and timing. She starts making financial preparations if you share resources. She begins reconnecting with old friends and building new social networks that don't include you. She might even start therapy or counseling. not to work on the relationship, but to process her feelings about leaving and get professional validation for her decision. The therapy angle is particularly insidious because it appears to be a positive step toward relationship improvement. You might even feel hopeful that she's taking initiative to work through whatever issues she's experiencing. But in reality, she's often using therapy as a place to safely express her dissatisfaction and get permission to prioritize her own happiness over the relationship commitment. Therapists, especially those influenced by modern psychological frameworks, typically encourage individual fulfillment over relationship preservation. They rarely challenge a woman's narrative about being unfulfilled or suggest that her expectations might be unrealistic. Instead, they often validate her feelings and encourage her to pursue whatever makes her happy, regardless of the impact on her partner or family. This professional validation becomes crucial for her psychological preparation because it removes guilt and provides moral justification for abandoning commitments. When a licensed professional tells you that you deserve to be happy and that staying in an unfulfilling relationship is harmful to your mental health, it becomes much easier to rationalize betrayal and departure. The financial preparation aspect of strategic departure reveals just how calculated this process really is. If you share bank accounts, she might start moving money to personal accounts under the guise of budgeting or saving for specific purposes. If you own property together, she begins researching her legal rights and potential settlement outcomes. If you have children together, she starts documenting any behavior that could be used against you in custody proceedings. This financial maneuvering happens months before any relationship conversations occur. She's protecting her economic interests while you're still operating under the assumption that you're building a future together. By the time she announces her intention to leave, she's already secured her financial position and knows exactly what she's entitled to in the dissolution. The documentation phase is where her strategic thinking becomes most apparent. She starts keeping records of arguments, photographing any damage from heated discussions, and maintaining communication trails that could be interpreted as evidence of your inadequacy or inappropriate behavior. This isn't paranoid preparation for unlikely scenarios. It's standard operating procedure for women who are planning to leave relationships. Modern divorce and family court systems heavily favor women, but even favorable systems require some form of justification for major asset division and custody decisions. The smart woman begins building this justification long before filing any papers. She's creating a narrative of victimhood and male inadequacy that will serve her interests when legal proceedings begin. The social network reconstruction happens simultaneously with financial preparation. She reconnects with friends from before your relationship, particularly those who never fully approved of you or the relationship. She cultivates relationships with divorced women who can provide tactical advice and emotional support during the transition. She joins groups or activities where she can meet new people who don't know your history together. This social engineering serves multiple purposes. It provides emotional support during the difficult transition period. It offers practical advice from women who have successfully navigated similar departures. It creates opportunities to meet potential replacement partners in socially acceptable contexts. And it builds a community that will validate her decision and support her new single identity. The children weaponization strategy emerges during this phase if kids are involved. She begins subtly undermining your authority and relationship with the children. She makes decisions without consulting you, tells them things about the relationship that turn them against you, and positions herself as the primary parent while relegating you to a support role. This psychological manipulation of children serves several strategic purposes. It ensures that custody decisions will favor her because the children prefer spending time with her. It creates emotional leverage she can use to control your behavior during and after the separation. It provides moral justification for her actions because she can claim she's protecting the children from an inadequate father. The cruelest aspect of this strategy is how it uses your love for your children against you. She knows that threatening your relationship with your kids is one of the most effective ways to control your behavior. She can make unreasonable demands, and you'll comply because resistance might result in reduced access to your children. The replacement securing process becomes more aggressive during the transition management phase. If she hasn't already identified a specific replacement, she becomes more open to possibilities and more responsive to male attention. She might join dating apps while still living with you, claiming she's just curious about what's available, or maintaining that she's not actually meeting anyone. The psychological gymnastics required to justify having dating profiles while in a committed relationship reveal just how compartmentalized her thinking has become. In her mind, she's not cheating because she hasn't physically done anything inappropriate. She's just exploring her options and trying to understand what life might look like without you. This exploration phase often involves emotional affairs that she rationalizes as friendships. She might be having deep, intimate conversations with other men about her relationship problems, her dreams and goals, her dissatisfaction with her current situation. These conversations provide emotional fulfillment that she's no longer getting from your relationship while helping her evaluate potential alternatives. The men she connects with during this phase are usually positioned as sympathetic listeners who understand her in ways you don't. They validate her complaints about you, offer different perspectives on life and relationships, and represent the excitement and novelty that long-term relationships inevitably lose. They don't have to be objectively better than you. They just have to be different and available. The timing manipulation becomes crucial as she approaches her departure date. She needs to control when and how the relationship ends to maximize her advantages and minimize her risks. This might involve waiting until after holidays, birthdays, or other significant events to avoid seeming unnecessarily cruel. It might involve coordinating with her work schedule, housing arrangements, or the children's school calendar. The conversation preparation reveals just how much thought she's put into managing your reaction and the aftermath. She rehearses what she's going to say, anticipates your likely responses, and plans how to handle various scenarios. She might even practice with friends or in therapy, getting feedback on her approach and refining her strategy. The actual breakup conversation is usually designed to minimize conflict while achieving her desired outcome. She'll present the decision as mutual, inevitable, or in your best interests. She'll emphasize that she still cares about you, but has realized you're not compatible long-term. She'll suggest that you both deserve to find someone who can make you truly happy. This framing serves several important functions. It reduces the likelihood of explosive reactions that could complicate her departure. It maintains her moral self-image by positioning the breakup as a kindness rather than a betrayal. It prevents you from fighting for the relationship by presenting the decision as logical and final rather than emotional and negotiable. The post-departure behavior patterns reveal the extent of her emotional preparation and strategic thinking. She moves on quickly, often seeming completely unaffected by the end of a relationship that devastated you. She maintains minimal contact, responds to your attempts at communication with polite but distant formality, and shows no interest in reconciliation or even friendship. This rapid emotional detachment isn't cruelty, it's psychological self-preservation. She's already processed the end of the relationship and moved on emotionally. Maintaining connection with you would only complicate her new life and potentially trigger guilt about how she handled the situation. Clean breaks serve her interests better than messy emotional entanglements. The new relationship timeline often shocks men who don't understand the preparation process. Within weeks or months of leaving, she's in a new relationship that seems serious and committed. From your perspective, this appears to be proof that she was cheating or that your entire relationship meant nothing to her. But from her perspective, this is the natural progression of a carefully planned transition. The new relationship might be with someone she met during the preparation phase, someone she reconnected with from her past, or someone entirely new who represents the fresh start she was seeking. The speed of this new commitment isn't evidence of callousness. It's evidence of how thoroughly she prepared herself psychologically for life without you. The historical revision becomes more elaborate as time passes. The story of your relationship gets rewritten to emphasize problems that were present from the beginning, incompatibilities that made the relationship doomed from the start, and warning signs that everyone except you could see. This revision serves to justify her actions and validate her decision to leave. In her revised history, she tried everything possible to make the relationship work. She communicated her needs clearly and repeatedly. She gave you countless opportunities to change and improve. She sacrificed her own happiness for years, trying to build something with someone who was ultimately incompatible with her goals and values. This narrative becomes so convincing that she genuinely believes it represents objective reality. She's not consciously lying when she tells people this version of events. She's convinced herself that this is what actually happened. The psychological need to maintain her self-image as a good person who only left after exhausting all alternatives requires this level of historical revision. The mutual friends management strategy reveals how thoroughly she's thought about the social implications of her departure. She's already had conversations with shared friends about relationship problems, subtly building support for her position before the official breakup occurs. She's positioned herself as the reasonable party who tried to make things work with someone who was unwilling or unable to meet her needs. By the time you're ready to tell your side of the story, she's already shaped the narrative in social circles. Your friends have heard about your inadequacies, your unwillingness to change, your failure to appreciate what you had. When you try to explain what actually happened, you sound bitter, defensive, and unable to take responsibility for your role in the relationship's failure. The children manipulation continues and often intensifies after separation. She uses your love for your kids as leverage to extract compliance with her demands. She controls access, schedules, and activities while maintaining that she's just doing what's best for the children. She subtly undermines your authority in relationship while appearing to support your involvement in their lives. This psychological warfare using children as weapons is perhaps the most devastating aspect of strategic female departure. It ensures that you remain connected to and controlled by someone who has already moved on emotionally. It prevents you from achieving the clean break that would allow you to heal and rebuild your life. The financial extraction continues long after the initial settlement through various manipulation tactics. Child support becomes a tool for ongoing control and resource extraction. Modifications to custody arrangements provide opportunities to revisit financial obligations. Special expenses and activities create additional financial demands that you're expected to meet, regardless of your changed circumstances. The legal system supports this ongoing extraction by prioritizing children's needs over fathers' rights or financial capacity. The assumption is that men should continue providing at previous levels regardless of how circumstances have changed. This creates a situation where you're permanently indentured to someone who betrayed and abandoned you. The new relationship presentation is carefully managed to maximize psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability about timing and preparation. She appears to be incredibly happy with someone who appreciates her in ways you never did. The new relationship seems effortless and natural, suggesting that the problems in your relationship were specifically about your inadequacies rather than general relationship challenges. This presentation serves multiple psychological functions. It validates her decision to leave by demonstrating that better options were available. It provides evidence that she's not damaged or difficult to love. You were simply the wrong person for her. It offers hope that she's found the happiness that your relationship prevented her from experiencing. The social media strategy becomes particularly important for managing perceptions about the transition. She posts carefully curated content that suggests she's thriving, growing, and discovering herself in ways that weren't possible during your relationship. The message is clear. Leaving you was the best decision she ever made, and she's never been happier. This social media presentation isn't necessarily false, but it's strategically incomplete. She's highlighting positive aspects of her new life, while concealing any difficulties, regrets, or challenges she might be experiencing. The goal is to project success and happiness that justifies her actions while discouraging any thoughts you might have about reconciliation. The long-term psychological impact of experiencing strategic female departure extends far beyond the immediate trauma of betrayal and abandonment. It fundamentally alters your understanding of relationships, trust, and female psychology in ways that affect every future interaction with women. Now you understand the systematic nature of female betrayal and departure. This isn't random emotional chaos. It's calculated biological programming executing with ruthless efficiency. Women don't just leave relationships, they orchestrate strategic exits while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions and timeline. The signs were always there: the testing, the withdrawal, the replacement securing, the historical revision. But you were operating from a framework of loyalty and commitment that doesn't align with female relationship psychology. You thought love meant working through problems together. She was evaluating whether you still represented her best available option. This knowledge changes everything. You stop taking their actions personally and start recognizing them as predictable responses to biological imperatives. You understand that her betrayal followed patterns that have nothing to do with your worth as a man. Most importantly, you learn to protect yourself from the devastating psychological impact of strategic female departure. The choice is yours. Continue believing in fairy tales about love and loyalty, or accept these uncomfortable realities and build relationships based on accurate understanding rather than wishful thinking. The men who understand these truths maintain their dignity and self-respect. The men who ignore them become casualties in someone else's strategic relationship management. Your happiness and psychological sovereignty are too valuable to sacrifice on the altar of female biological programming.